Pedigrees. Pedigrees. One way geneticists can determine if offspring are going to inherit a genetic trait or a genetic disease is by creating a pedigree and analyzing the patterns. A pedigree is similar to a family tree, except that it also shows whether each person in the tree possesses a specific trait, or is a carrier for that trait, or does not possess the alleles for that trait. You can think of it as a family history for a specific genetic trait or disease. Important symbols in pedigrees. A square is a male, a circle is a female. If the square or circle is blank, the individual does not possess the trait. They are not affected by the trait. If the square or circle is shaded, then the individual is affected by the trait and they do possess the trait. If we know the individual is a carrier, we don't always know that, but if we know, we will shade half of the square or we will shade half of the circle. And if it's blank, they could still be a carrier. It's only when we know that they're a carrier that we'll shade half of it. The way the trees branch out is we have a line connecting the parents together, the parents who cross, and then the siblings that are connected to that line are children of the parents. If, say, the female is to marry a male, they could have their own children, and the male square here on the left is not related to the male on the right. They are in-laws. And if we have a line going through the square or the circle, that means the individual has deceased. Autosomal traits. If the trait being looked at is an autosomal trait, then both the males and females can exhibit the trait. It is not gender specific. If the trait is autosomal dominant, then every individual with the phenotype for that trait will have a parent with the phenotype for that trait. If the trait is autosomal recessive, then the individual with the phenotype for that trait can have one, two, or neither parent exhibit the phenotype for that trait. Refer back to those monohybrid Punnett squares for review. Heterozygous versus homozygous. Remember, heterozygous means the individual has different alleles, so one dominant and one recessive. Homozygous means the individual has the same allele, so two dominant alleles or two recessive alleles. If an individual has a homozygous dominant or heterozygous genotype, they will exhibit the dominant phenotype, because remember, that dominant allele is there, so you have the dominant phenotype. If the individual is homozygous recessive, they will exhibit the recessive phenotype, because there is no dominant allele, it's not present, so now we see the recessive phenotype. If two individuals are heterozygous for a recessive trait, they will not show the trait phenotypically, but they can produce offspring that are homozygous recessive and do exhibit the trait. If some of the offspring just happen to not receive the dominant allele, they just receive one recessive allele from each parent, the offspring could exhibit that recessive trait.